What is going on, everybody? I am HoopsandHipHop, and welcome back to another episode of the Pokeblock Podcast. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about more of Pokemon Sword and Shield. At this point, we're exactly 3 weeks away from the game, which is absolutely insane, and the countdown really is on. I talked about that in the last episode last week, where we were officially basically a month away. We were getting to the point where it was just like the final countdown, and now we're really starting to get really, really close. So basically, for the next probably about month or so, maybe even like 2 months, because month before the game, month after the game, we're going to be talking about Sword and Shield, because that's really going to be everything that is on anyone's minds when it comes to the Pokemon community. So we're just going to be talking about different facets of the game. We might sprinkle in some other things here and there, but we're just going to be covering everything Sword and Shield related as we lead up to the launch, and then obviously we'll have plenty of stuff to discuss after the games come out. We'll be able to discuss how the game was. I might do like a review podcast sort of thing. We'll have to see what happens, but yeah, basically it's just going to be Sword and Shield for the next little bit, which hopefully you guys are okay with. I'm definitely okay with that because I'm super excited about these games, and I just want to talk about them because I'm just so excited to finally be able to experience them. It seems so crazy that we're literally only 3 weeks away. We've obviously been waiting since we first knew about them in February, and it just seems crazy that we're already to November, and the whole year has just kind of flown by, and it's just absolutely insane. I really think it's incredible. And so yeah, without any further ado, why don't we just go ahead and get into what we're talking about today. So today's subject matter that I wanted to focus on surrounding Pokemon Sword and Shield, because we don't really have any like brand new information once again, so gotta just be a little creative with our subject matter, as I've talked about before on the podcast. Kind of gotta just stretch those brain muscles and come up with something like interesting to talk about. But today we're going to be talking about how Pokemon Sword and Shield could possibly be the best Pokemon games ever. This is something that I briefly mentioned in my personal video on my own YouTube channel about basically my hopes for the game. I said in that video that I hope that Pokemon Sword and Shield is the best Pokemon game ever, which obviously, naturally, as a Pokemon fan, you should do, because you want the franchise to keep continually growing and doing better, and so you want the newest game to be the best game. It just makes sense. But with that said, as I said in that video, I do think that Sword and Shield has a chance to pull that off. It's not going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think it has a chance to pull it off. And the reason why I say that is for several different reasons. The first of those being that even though we haven't seen the whole game, we do know from what we have seen that there are several things within the game that Pokemon Sword and Shield is already either the best in the franchise at or is amongst the greatest at. So for instance, we already know that this game has the best graphics in the series, bar none. Like, regardless of your personal preference on the graphics, it is a literal fact that these are the best graphics ever in the series. And so, yeah, it gets to take advantage of the fact that it's obviously the most modern, most recent game, but that is still a fact nonetheless. And even though graphics aren't everything, they still do kind of add to the overall immersion in the game. They definitely can allow for some extra enjoyment, so they are something to be considered at the same time. So there's that. There's the graphics. There's also the music. That, once again, this is kind of going to be an extended version of what I talked about in my Hopes video, just so I can get a little more in depth with it. But with the music with this being an HD game is going to obviously be HD itself. It's going to be orchestrated. It's going to be the highest fidelity soundtrack in a Pokemon game, at least main series anyway, that we have ever had, which once again is a huge deal as far as like the soundtrack itself goes and the compositions. What we've heard so far sounds amazing. I can't say for sure just because we haven't heard a whole lot, but what we have heard so far sounds amazing. There's even bagpipes in the soundtrack, which in my opinion, I know this is definitely an opinion, but that basically just confirms that these are going to have the best this game, I should say, is going to have the best soundtrack of any Pokemon game, just because it's got bagpipes. Like, you cannot beat bagpipes. They're amazing. They sound great, and having them in a Pokemon game is incredible. So it's got, from a technical perspective, it's already the best. From a composition perspective, it's, I think, at the very least going to be up there, if not the best. So it's got that going for it. In terms of just like the region itself and being based on the UK, I think it's definitely up there as well, just because of the amount of culture it has. It's got a lot of just like vibrant areas and just different things to it that really, really make it stand out. Obviously, there's the wild area. That's an open world section of a Pokemon game, which is something we have wanted for so long. Granted, it's not the whole game, but it's a start. It's something we have wanted for a long time, so that's a huge deal. It's also just straight up a Pokemon game on a home console. It's a game that obviously can take advantage of the power of a home console, but it's also one that you can just straight up play on a TV, which once again is something that we've wanted basically since Pokemon existed, and when Pokemon was first introduced onto a home console with the Nintendo 64. So this game is just doing so many things that either A, are the best in the series, or B, that we've wanted for a really, really long time. And obviously the verdict is still out on so many things, so you can't really say for sure at this point. But with being able to talk about that many things already, that it's already doing well, that's why I say it's got a fighting chance. The difference maker is going to come in the form of basically just what we haven't seen, like whether or not the story ends up being really good, whether or not the roster of Pokemon proves to be really good, whether the wild area kind of holds up as, kind of lives up to the hype, so to speak. The post game is going to be a huge deal. That's going to be a huge, I think the post game is basically the single most, it's the single greatest deciding factor probably in regards to whether or not this could be, or any Pokemon game could be the best Pokemon game ever, just because the current best Pokemon game ever, in terms of the majority of the fan opinion, are Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. And they are that way because they obviously have the Kanto postgame where you get to go to a second region. And while I would absolutely love to go to a second region in these games, and I will continue to hope for a second region until literally the day I die, I'm never going to give up hope that that will happen again, because it needs to happen again at least once in our lifetime. I don't think it necessarily needs to have that, specifically to be the best. It just needs to have something that's, really, really good and just really amazing by comparison. So it's gotta, whatever it ends up doing, because I don't think we're going to get a second region in Sword and Shield. So I'm not counting on that, but like I said, with that said, I do still think this game could be the best ever. It's just gotta, whatever it does in the post game, because first off, it has to have a really good post game. It just straight up has to. So whatever it ends up doing with its post game has to be comparable and stand up to Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Whatever it does, it has to stand up to that Kanto post game. And so we're just going to have to wait and see. It's really interesting to think about what they could do that could match up with that level of a post game if they don't just do the second region thing again. I would say if they're going to match that, they would have to do something in the form of opening up some kind of new area. Even if it's not a region, they've got to open up some kind of new area that will allow you to explore more and just open up new areas to travel through, because I think that's a huge reason why adding Kanto in Gold and Silver is so effective. And then secondly, I think they need to add length to it, so it needs to be long. It needs to be actually significantly, it needs to be a significant amount of gameplay, once again, i.e. Kanto. And then thirdly, it needs to add some story to it. This isn't something that the Kanto section of Gold and Silver really did. You basically were just challenging the gyms and that's it. So this could be potentially where the post-game of Sword and Shield could have a leg up on the post-game of Heart Gold and Soul Silver if it added some legitimate story, i.e. the Delta episode, for instance, that went on for several hours. Like, the Delta episode is a prime example of what should happen. In terms of it's a good example of what needs to happen in a good post game, because that was an excellent post game. They did a great job with it. The only thing I would say that could be done better is it could be a little longer. We definitely could have a little bit longer of a story, because overall the Delta episode, while good, and I do recognize it's a post game, so it's not going to be a second quest or anything, I felt like it could have been a little longer, just get a little more out of it. And so whatever Sword and Shield's post game does, once again, needs to do that. So it's got to have length to it, preferably story. It's got to add new areas to obviously be able to explore, and overall just gotta be comparable in enjoyment and quality to the Kanto section of Heart Gold and Soul Silver if it wants to be the best Pokemon game ever, because like I said, that's what Heart Gold and Soul Silver and Gold and Silver bank on every time when this conversation comes up, that basically wins it the argument every time, because no other Pokemon game has something like that can be matched in terms of that level of enjoyment. So ultimately, we're just going to have to wait and see, but I do think Sword and Shield has a shot, and I'm hopeful. It's weird because Gold and Silver are my favorite Pokemon games, and obviously Heart Gold and Soul Silver because they're the remakes. So it's weird to hope against my favorite Pokemon game, to say that, oh man, I hope my favorite Pokemon game isn't my favorite Pokemon game anymore after this one. That feels strange. It feels weird because it feels like I'm betraying the game. But like I said, if you're a Pokemon fan, you want the franchise to continually improve. You want every game to be better than the last, and that's what this is all about. Is just wanting this game to be the best ever, because it's not only is it the newest game, but it's a game that we've waited for so long, and that it's the first home console game. It's the first game with any kind of sense of open world area. So it's a very monumental game that we've wanted and waited for a long time. It's going to be very significant, regardless of how it ends up doing because of that. And so this one, I always am hoping for the next game to be the best game, but I think this one in particular, I'm hoping for a little bit more. Just because of what it means for the franchise, this milestone that it represents. So while it does feel a little bit weird to root against Gold and Silver, I gotta do it for the sake of the franchise. Beat it out, become my new favorite Pokemon game, Sword and Shield. I am rooting for you. So yeah, with that being said, we're definitely not done. We've still got some time. I feel like that was my ending speech, yet I feel like we're only about halfway through the podcast today. But I do have some other stuff to talk about. There were some details that were publicated, that's not a word, were published over the past couple days via various publications. They got the chance to interview Shigeru Omori and Junichi Masuda, and they published those interviews over the past couple days. Nothing really that's insane, obviously not revealing a new Pokemon or anything like that, which at this point I feel like we're going to get one more trailer and then that'll be it, because we're just so close to the game at this point. I feel like they'll do one the week of or the week before just to remind you, hey, this game is only a week away, and then they'll kind of call it good, which is, once again, awesome. We don't know anything about this game. It's great to be blind going into it. But yeah, as far as what they talked about in these interviews, they talked about different little technical things as far as the game's development. They talked about how every Pokemon, apparently, from start to finish, in terms of creating a new Pokemon, getting its design together, making the artwork, putting it into the game, modeling it, animating it, rigging it, basically programming it into the game itself to the point where it's a final product in the game. They said that Omori estimated that takes about 3 months per Pokemon from start to finish. And if you weren't aware, there's probably going to be about 900 Pokemon in this game. Over 1,000 with all of the different forms, i.e. Alola forms, form changes, Gigantamax forms, etc. It's crazy the workload that they have. Obviously, they're not doing one after the other. They've got multiple people working on this, and there's a lot of different factors because obviously most of those Pokemon they've already created the art for. They've already created like the move sets and stuff like that. So it's not going to be as like gargantuan of a task as it sounds. But regardless, that's still a gargantuan task for that to take an estimated 3 months per character. I think that's absolutely mind-blowing. Like, Pokemon, more so than any other franchise, I feel like has more of that type of a workload compared to other franchises just because the amount of Pokemon that are in the game. Like, no other video game franchise, and I realize there are other, like, monster franchises per se, like Digimon, or you could say Monster Hunter maybe. There are other franchises that do something similar. Yokai Watch is another one, but Pokemon obviously is the one that established that kind of genre, and it definitely has more going on than any other game in that aspect. And it's such a unique, like, even though there are kind of like copycats, quote unquote, it is still such a unique concept for a game and an RPG in and of itself, to the point where it's created kind of its own unique, just intense almost workload that is really crazy to think about when you kind of put it in that detail, where you think about every individual step that has to be taken to create one Pokemon. Like, when I personally think about that kind of stuff, it makes me appreciate the heck out of Game Freak just that much more, because they do so much on these games in the back end that we don't really see. Because when you see a new Pokemon on the screen for the first time, all you think about is, hey, that's a new Pokemon. One more new Pokemon they made in the game, and then when you're done with the game, you're like, oh, they added 80 Pokemon. That kind of sucks. I wish they would have added more. But then you don't like think about the fact that that's 80 Pokemon that they designed. They had to think of like an inspiration for it. They had to come up with a design that looked creative and interesting and unique and didn't step on the toes of any other Pokemon. They had to come up with move sets for all of those Pokemon, when they learned moves at what time. They had to come up with TMs that they were able to learn. They had to come up with move tutor moves. They had to come up with egg moves, breeding moves. They had to come up with obviously the 3D model itself to be put into the game. They had to animate it so it obviously moves around in the game. They had to create a shiny form. They just have to do so many things for every single Pokemon. It's almost insane that they still add Pokemon at all. Like, I feel like we should be very, very grateful for that. Just the more I think about it, it's just, we very much should be grateful for everything that Game Freak gives us at this point, because they've already given us so much. There's so much that goes on. And when you put it in that context, to me, the whole Pokedex thing doesn't seem so bad, because I would consider myself a person with a very, very strong work ethic. But if I was working at Game Freak, even if I had a team of like 100 other people around me, and I know game development studios can get even higher than that, but if I had like a team of like 100 or 200 people, other people around me, even then I would just feel so like intimidated and nervous and overwhelmed by that amount of workload that entails. Like, that is a huge, like, I feel like I keep going back to this, excuse me. But it's just, that is a huge deal. And then that's not even including, like, obviously modeling the human characters. That's, once again, just that many more characters. You got to model, animate, design, blah, 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 all that stuff. And then now that we're in the 3D space, you obviously have to model the entire region itself. You've got to model every house, every building, interior, exterior. You got to give them different shapes, sizes. You've got to design basically like the layout of the towns themselves. You've got to design the routes and the different locations. And it's just, there's so much to do. It's insane. And so, I don't know. I just appreciate the heck out of Game Freak, because when you really start thinking about it, they do a ton to make these games, and they always turn out great. And I know this one's going to turn out great. And like I said, hopefully the best ever. So if James Turner or anyone is listening to this at Game Freak, thank you so much. You are appreciated, and I'll never be able to tell you how much it personally means to me to be able to have these games, because I obviously love Pokemon games. But moving on, the other things they did talk about in these interviews were, once again, little things. They talked about the creation of Surfetch'd. The reason being is because the leak that Farfetch'd uses as its like signature weapon, ironically enough, is like a symbol. It's like a national symbol in Wales, and then apparently, according to Omori, the leaks there are much bigger in the UK compared to how they look in Japan. So that obviously just made perfect sense. Like, honestly, what are the odds that... Because I'm pretty sure Game Freak didn't create a region based on the UK just so they could make a Farfetch'd evolution. So, like, what are the odds that you create a Pokemon region and then one of the Pokemon that has basically been starved of an evolution for over 20 years just so happens to, like, we just so happen to stumble upon an exact reason to give it an evolution. Like, the leak that it uses is a national symbol in the area that you're basing this region on. Like, how much more perfect does it get than that in terms of like giving a new evolution to a Pokemon? Like, I think that's just so cool, because like in terms of the design of Surfetch'd, I'm not a big fan at all, because it doesn't really change in terms of its body at all, aside from going from brown to white. The only thing that really changes is its weaponry that it uses, which isn't a part of the Pokemon's body itself. So I personally I don't really consider that much of an evolution, but the fact that it actually has a reason for evolving in Galar specifically, I think is really, really cool. I think I think that just gives meaning to the Pokemon. As long as a Pokemon has meaning, then I'm okay with it, whether it looks fat, whether it's short, whether it's cute, whether it's ugly. As long as a Pokemon has a reason for doing what it's doing, I can be okay with it. And so initially I was not a fan of Surfetch'd at all, but when I learned this backstory about the leak, I was like, okay, I'm still not a fan of your design, but I can live and respect what you're doing because you have a reason for being here. So yeah, just another example of Game Freak doing their homework and actually putting thought and effort into this game, which is amazing. There was a couple other things that they talked about that I'm trying to remember. That once again, they were kind of just like little things, nothing too crazy. There was the mention that Pokemon Go isn't directly like connected or can't directly connect with Pokemon Sword and Shield. It only is going to connect through Pokemon Home, which isn't a huge deal and is probably a relief to a lot of people, because when it comes to the main series, people don't want the casual Pokemon Go getting in their main series. They don't want the main course, if you will, of Pokemon Sword and Shield or main series Pokemon getting touched by a casual appetizer like Pokemon Go. They don't want the corn touching the steak, for instance, which I've never gotten that. I've never, like, if you're a type of person who doesn't like their food touching, like, no offense if anyone out there is like that that's listening to this, but like, what is the logic there? Like, it all ends up in your stomach regardless. So, like, it doesn't like change the taste of one or the other unless it's like, I don't know, something that's like can be applied, like, I don't know. This is getting off topic, but yeah, we're getting off topic here. But basically, yeah, I have totally lost my train of thought. I don't know where I was going with that. But yeah, basically, Pokemon Go, not in Sword and Shield directly, only through Pokemon Home. Not a big deal, but probably is a big deal and a relief to somebody out there. Who knows? You know what? Yeah, I think that's where we're going to wrap up today. Today was a weird episode, I'm going to be honest, just because, like I said, we didn't have a whole lot of news or anything to go off of. I felt really weird about the idea of talking about something that wasn't Sword and Shield related, because we're just to that time of year where that is going to be the talk of the town. That's going to be what like me as a Pokemon YouTuber needs to talk about, because that's basically going to be what is on everyone's mind until we get the game. And then for obviously the months following the game, that's going to be what is talked about in the Pokemon community. And it's basically going to take over. So we're going to get creative with our Pokemon discussions here over the next few weeks. And then once the game comes out, we'll have so much more to talk about. We'll be able to get into the nitty-gritty of the game. Obviously, I'll spoiler warning the podcast if I get into spoilers, but I'll probably avoid spoilers as much as possible at the same time. But overall, like I said, that is going to wrap it up for this episode. So thank you so much for listening. If you are tuning in right now, wherever you're tuning in, I appreciate the crap out of it. It means so much to me. Be sure to follow wherever you're following. Leave a comment and a like if you're on YouTube. Follow my YouTube channel if you haven't yet for more Pokemon content. And like I said, stay tuned for the next episode. I post these every Friday. They're a lot of fun, and your support on them is sincerely appreciated. So I hope you guys all have a great day. I hope you have a great weekend. And until the next one, as always, I will catch you guys later.